What do you think about asynchronous, like a-causal parallelism? So it's called the C phenomena, and I think synchronicity. And I think Jung commented a lot after he had a dinner with Einstein. He went back home and he thought about the synchronicity aspects. And Hans Berger, who was the creator of EEG machines, supposedly, he had this event of a synchronicity that actually led him to invent EEG. It's historically been recorded. There's letters between Jung and Einstein that were exchanged, which explains this kind of lecture that he gave in this dinner table that he was having with Jung. And later on, he conceptualized, based on this I Ching book, which is an esoteric book. From the Chinese tradition, the Taoist tradition. Yeah, and so they talk about this, how A and B being two independent localities, yet having the same event at the same time. And so I often wonder, like, how must one empirically look at synchronicity, because it's highly psychical, and again, it could just be disregarded completely. But it still seems very interesting that two events which are the same in essence have two different localities and still happening at the same time, and whether how can someone somehow objectively navigate through understanding this kind of synchronous event.
And it makes ontological assumptions too.
Oh yeah, true.
So I was looking at this psi phenomena when I was young, and I found this, of course, very fascinating, because there's the potential to completely uproot the way in which we make sense of reality. So we should pay a lot of attention to whether it's true or not. And it struck me that almost everything that comes up in this space can be explained by either psychosis or telepathy, or a combination of both of them. And maybe we can also explain the remaining instances of telepathy with psychosis, which means a way in which your brain models reality that is not indicative of the observations, but of glitches in artifacts in the way that your brain models reality and the resulting dream is formed. There is some indication that this might be true, because, for instance, synchronicity increases in people that are in a manic state. And this manic state can also, for instance, be introduced by psychedelic drugs or amphetamines. And as a result, people will experience more and more of the synchronicity. And when these people describe the synchronicity that they experience to a person that is in a sober state, the sober person will often find that the synchronicity is not that interesting, that basically the way in which these phenomena are connected appears to be spurious and not very meaningful, that the events are not as meaningful as they appear to this particular person, and that the gravity that the person assigns to these objects and the resulting connection between them is a result of an overload of meaning, that somehow a thing that is completely inconsequential, like, say, a coin that you find on the floor and that you have dreamt before last week, that this coin is actually meaningless. And that you might have dreamt about coins, and that you find this coin is just a random coincidence. And maybe you didn't even dream about this coin. Maybe this is just a déjà vu kind of memory, where the memory is instantiated at a later point and appears as a reconstruction in your own mind, as a glitch, so to speak. And you can only know this if you have written down your dreams meticulously an hour ago. And I found that a lot of people that have regular prophetic dreams notice this thing, that as soon as the dreams are affecting an important thing in reality, like, for instance, next week's lottery's numbers, the men in black show up and prevent them from writing it down. So they will not have a recording of that dream for some reason. And right, that is very suspicious. It could be that the men in black exist, because it would totally mess up this game reality in which we are if somebody is cheating by knowing information that they know only from outside of the game in the parent reality. But it could also be this is bullshit, and it's a form of psychosis, a way in which your brain is making sense of reality that is not true. But let's for a moment entertain the possibility that it is all true. What would this imply? It would imply that the standard model of physics is probably wrong. The standard model of physics, we know it's not complete, but it is able to predict reality at a very, very fine granularity to a very large number of decimal places. So basically something would have to happen that is explaining violations of the conservation of energy that we haven't discovered yet. But if spirits exist and move things in the world, they must violate somehow the laws of conservation, which means you would sooner or later notice this because the numbers don't even out in the lab. If there are physical phenomena, it means that there is an entire branch of physics that hasn't been discovered yet. And this branch of physics would probably involve a secondary topology, so, a way in which we can construct a space that is orthogonal to the space around us. So the things that are adjacent to each other are adjacent with respect in our space to photonic interactions largely. And so it's electromagnetic waves that we are perceiving when we see light. It's electromagnetism that we perceive when we touch solid objects. When we hear sounds, it's electromagnetic objects, the molecules of the air pushing at each other, right, that produce these mechanical waves in the air. Everything that that our senses give us access to is electromechanical in some sense. And even neutrinos and so on act in this photonic space and can have interactions with the photonic space. And the weak force and the strong force only act at the distances of the nucleus of an atom, which means that there might not even be in this three-dimensional space. It might be in a different dimensionality, so to speak, so that we cannot really project them into the same three-dimensional topology. And if telepathy is possible, if this, it might introduce a different kind of local space that is not the same, where things are adjacent to each other in that space that are not adjacent in the photonic space, which means there is an entire set of interactions that we are somehow missing, or a way to interpret interactions that we are observing, we are not interpreting in the right way. The chances of that being true, that no physicist has ever discovered this, and there is no experiment that we know of that would not be violated by this, are slim. But it's not something that we cannot completely rule out, right? The more we know about physics, the harder it is to change it, because we know more and more of the known constraints. And so basically, it's not harder because we are now indoctrinated just with the physicists and don't want to deviate from their doctrines. But it's because we know more and more about the constraints that all our future models have to account for if they want to make progress on the existing ones. And this is why most physicists would tend to dismiss the possibility of telepathy, for instance. There are several ways of looking at telepathy. There is a very straightforward and simple way that, for instance, we can probably entrain ourselves with the nervous systems of others in such a way that we can basically create resonance effects that allow us to experience mental states together that we cannot experience individually. And it might also allow to, in a non-verbal way, to develop ideas together, if you are really well synced, that can be interesting and subtle. And that would allow to have communication between each other and exchange thoughts without speaking. But it would require something like a close entanglement, usually in the photonic space, which means we have to see each other, maybe touch each other, maybe having seen and touched each other for a long time. If we are able to send information to a person around the planet immediately, instantly, into their minds, we cannot explain this with known physics. Right, so if this kind of telepathy was possible, it would require us to provide two parts of the world. One is the idea that our own mind is generated in our own brain, and the other one that that basically there is that physics is local with respect to light or to electromagnetism. The non-locality that we currently allow in physics does not allow the exchange of information, because you cannot identify where the information comes from in this non-local fashion. If you cannot address it, if no observer, if no system that is controlling anything that is performing any function in the universe can know where the information comes from that drives it, it's just noise, right? It is not going to be something that is going to drive the universe along. It would only work if there is some kind of regular structure that would allow you to identify the origin of that information. But if we had such a second set of a local universe that is just doesn't have the same kind of locality as this normal three-dimensional universe that we are in, then how would you know what the boundary of your own brain is? If telepathy is possible, how would you know which of your thoughts are actually being computed in your own brain and are not just being driving your parts of your brain based on things that happen outside of it, right? And if you open up this possibility, maybe there's a level of your own cognition and perception that is entirely driven outside of brains, that is driven somewhere else in the universe, and you are just some kind of antenna for it, and we all are, and maybe there is some global brain, right? And then you go into the domain of panpsychism, and not a panpsychism where it necessarily the mind is computed in a parent universe and therefore becomes from to the observer inseparable to matter, but there is something like a pervasive mind that is emerging over all the organized matter that is that has controlled complexity, where some computation takes place to keep the universe in the shape in which it is. And we are, in some sense, a small part of that, and can maybe link up to it, right? It's very tempting. It's also very romantic. I don't know if it's true.